I never asked who bought my first bike. I just rode it, thinking it was a gift from my parents. But then, years later, a letter arrived from my rich grandfather, who I barely knew, and it revealed a shocking truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Betrayal, hidden money, and secrets my parents tried to bury. All of it finally came to light. And what I discovered about my own life left me speechless. You won't believe what they hid from me. My name is Natalie Armstrong, and I'm 29 years old. If you saw me today, living in a small, peaceful apartment, overlooking a quiet street, working a steady job, paying my own bills, you'd probably think I had a normal childhood, maybe even a privileged one. Clean house, reliable parents, birthday cakes with pastel frosting, and the occasional summer trip that filled old photo albums. But the truth is, my childhood had a strange emptiness to it. Not a loud one, a quiet one. An emptiness you only notice when you look back as an adult and ask yourself questions you were too young or too trusting to ask. And for me, that emptiness begins with a memory I used to think was simple, sweet, and innocent. My first bike. I was 10 years old the day it arrived. I remember because the sun was barely rising, a warm orange glow stretching across our front yard. I had been staring at these same windows for years, watching other kids zoom down the street on their bikes, leaving laughter trails behind them, while I just stood there with my hands in my pockets. My parents always told me bicycles were too risky, or too expensive, or something we could think about later. Later never came, or at least I thought it wouldn't, until that morning. I woke up sleepy and annoyed, my hair a mess, planning to complain about the cereal my mom kept buying even though I hated it. But then, when I stepped outside, everything inside me froze. There, standing in the center of our yard, like something from a dream, was a brand new red bicycle. Bright, shiny, perfect. The kind of bike every kid in my neighborhood would have traded their whole lunchbox for. I remember walking toward it slowly, scared that if I blinked too hard, it would disappear. My fingers brushed the handles. Smooth rubber, still smelling new. There was a tiny silver bell on the side, the kind that gives off a cheerful ring that makes you smile before you can help it. I must have stood there for minutes, stunned, my breath fogging in the morning air. And then my mom stepped outside. "Oh," she said a little too brightly, "you found it." I turned to her. "But whose is it?" "It's yours," she said quickly. "Someone wanted you to have it." Someone? What kind of answer was that? I asked who bought it, of course. I was 10, but I wasn't clueless. But my mom smiled the way adults smile when they want you to stop asking questions. "Somer friend," she told me. "Someone who cares." Back then, I didn't think much of it. Adults talk that way all the time, especially parents. Everything is either for your own good or because you're too young to understand. So I let it go. I hopped on the bike and I rode until my legs ached. That memory became one of the happiest moments of my childhood until much, much later. Because what I didn't know that day, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that the bike wasn't just a gift, it was a message. A message from someone I barely knew. Someone my parents always kept at a careful distance. Someone who was watching over me quietly, even when I didn't realize it. My grandfather, Henry Armstrong. A man who, at that time, was nothing more than a name whispered occasionally at holidays. A man I almost never saw, but always heard conflicting things about. A man who showed up in my life like shadows. Faint, quiet, but impossible to ignore once you see them. But at 10 years old, I didn't connect any of that. Not yet. Back then, I was too excited about the bike to see anything strange. I spent days riding it through the street, my hair blowing behind me, my cheeks flushed, my heart flying. For the first time, I felt like I belonged with the other kids. I wasn't the odd one who always watched from the sidewalk. I was part of the group. I thought that bike was freedom. But years later, I learned it was the beginning of a truth my family never wanted me to see. What I remember most about that time isn't just the bike. It's the way my parents acted afterwards. At first, they seemed normal, smiling, nodding, watching from the porch as I rode lap after lap. But something felt off. Even at 10, I noticed the way their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes, the way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking, the way my dad kept checking the mail more often than usual. And the strangest part is, they never mentioned the family friend again. Not once. Children pick up on silence more than adults realize. Sometimes silence is louder than words. In the weeks that followed, I tried once or twice to ask, "Who got me the bike again?" But each time the topic was brushed away with the same airy, suspiciously rehearsed answers. "Oh, sweetheart, someone who loves you. Don't worry about that. It's yours. Enjoy it." Enjoy it. That was the repeated phrase, as if the story of the bike didn't matter, as if the giver didn't matter, as if the truth didn't matter. I didn't know it then, but my parents were hiding something, not just from me, but possibly from themselves, because when adults lie to their children for too long, they start lying to themselves too. Looking back, I remember one moment very clearly, one that didn't make sense until years later. I was sitting on the porch after a long ride. My dad thought I was distracted cleaning the bike chain. He stepped outside with a letter in his hand. I couldn't see the front of the envelope, but I could see the way he held it, tightly, like it was something dangerous. He looked around, as if trying to make sure I wasn't watching. Then he slipped the letter into his jacket and walked back inside. At 10 years old, you don't connect tiny dots like that. You don't understand secrets. You don't recognize guilt. You only feel a strange heaviness and move on. But that letter, whatever it was, had everything to do with the bike and with the man who sent it. Not long after the bike arrived, my grandpa called our house. I remember the ring. I remember my mom's face going pale when she saw the caller ID. And I remember her stepping into the hallway to whisper quickly, urgently, "No, no, we said we wouldn't involve her. She's fine. She's perfectly fine. You can't keep doing this. She doesn't need to know." I didn't know who she was talking to, but I knew it wasn't a family friend. And after that call, my parents' behavior changed even more. They became strict about one thing. If anything ever arrived for me by mail, they wanted to see it first. I didn't realize the significance of that rule until 20 years later. At 10, it felt random. At 29, it felt like the starting point of a long hidden truth. My bike became my world. The pedals were my soundtrack. The road was my escape. Every corner of my neighborhood held a memory. The mailbox I crashed into, the tree I always circled twice, the tiny hill that felt like a roller coaster when I sped down it. I told everyone at school about my new bike. Kids asked who bought it. I repeated the same lie I believed. A family friend. Some nodded. Some didn't care. Some looked confused but said nothing. But one girl, Jessica, my neighbor, asked something I never forgot. "Why didn't your parents get it for you?" I didn't know what to say back then, so I shrugged, laughed, and changed the subject. But that question would come back to haunt me decades later. Because the truth wasn't that my parents couldn't buy it. They didn't want to. Because they knew buying me that bike meant acknowledging a promise, one they were determined to break. A promise made between my parents and my grandpa long before I was even born. A promise my parents chose to ignore. A promise my grandpa never forgot. You might think this is just a story about a bike, but the bike was only the beginning. It was the first crack in a wall I didn't know existed. A wall built with silence, fear, guilt, and hidden motives. And the man behind that first crack, the man who bought me the bike, was a man I barely knew, my grandpa. A man who tried to be part of my life, but my parents didn't let him. A man who wrote me a final letter years later, the letter that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. A letter that explained why he bought me that bike when I was 10. Why my parents didn't. Why they pretended it came from a family friend. And what he was trying to protect me from. But that's all later. Right now, the story is just beginning. Because there is something else about that bike. Something I didn't understand as a child, but I see clearly now. When I rode it down the street that first day, feeling the wind on my face, laughing for no reason, someone was watching me. Not from a distance, not hidden, not threatening, just watching. A tall figure standing at the end of the street. A man with silver hair, a man in a dark coat. A man my young mind didn't recognize. But years later, when I saw an old photograph, I realized exactly who it was. My grandpa. Watching me ride the bike he gave me, the only gift he ever managed to get to me without my parents finding out first. The first sign that he had been trying to reach me all along. The first sign that my parents were keeping him away. The first sign that my childhood wasn't what it seemed. I didn't know it yet, but that bike was the beginning of everything, and the end of everything I believed about my family. My grandpa, Henry Armstrong, the man I barely knew, the man my parents rarely mentioned, and when they did, it felt like his name carried weight. Not the warm, nostalgic weight people have when talking about grandparents, no. My family spoke about him with the kind of stiffness people save for topics they would rather avoid. Growing up, I never questioned that. Kids don't analyze the emotional temperature of a room the way adults do. They just feel it. They learn what is okay to talk about and what isn't. And in my house, talking about Grandpa Henry wasn't forbidden, but it was discouraged. A quiet boundary. Invisible, but unmistakable. And I crossed that boundary only once as a child, without even realizing it. It was a Sunday afternoon. I must have been 11 or 12. My dad and I were cleaning the garage, which mostly meant he was organizing tools while I swept dust from one place to another and pretended to help. At some point, buried under a stack of old boxes, I found a photo frame. Dusty, the glass slightly cracked at one corner. Inside it was a picture of a man. Tall, strong shoulders, silver hair, sharp eyes that felt gentle and intimidating at the same time. He stood next to a lake, sunlight bouncing off the water behind him. I liked the picture instantly. It looked peaceful and warm, like the kind of moment that hides a story. I brought it to my dad. "Who's this?" I asked. The moment he looked at the photo, his entire expression changed. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened, his eyes darted to me for a second, then away. He took the frame from my hands and placed it face down on the workbench. "Just an old relative," he said, already moving on. "Someone we don't talk to anymore." "But why?" I asked, innocently, unaware I had touched a nerve. "It's complicated." That's all he said, and the conversation ended. I didn't know it then, but that man in the photo, was the same man who stood at the end of the street years earlier watching me ride the bike he bought me. The same man who would later send me the letter that changed everything. My grandpa. But if you had asked me at 12 what I knew about him, here's what I would have told you, honestly and without hesitation. Not much. My parents didn't tell stories about him. There were no framed pictures of him in the house, no visits during holidays, no birthday calls, no family traditions connected to him. It was as if he existed on the other side of our family history, present but distant. But the strange thing is, he wasn't absent. Not really. Even when I was a kid, I felt something around the edges of my life, something that didn't fit the simple version of the story my parents gave me. Birthday cards that arrived with no return address, gifts that were from a friend, conversations my parents pushed aside whenever I walked into the room, mail they opened before giving to me. A quiet tension anytime money or family history came up. Small things, easy to ignore as a child, impossible to ignore as an adult. My mom talked about him the least. Whenever his name slipped into a conversation, even accidentally, she would switch topics instantly. And if I pushed even a little, she'd say something like, "He has his own life, sweetheart," or "It's better this way." Better for who? For me or for them? I never asked directly because I was a polite child, the kind who didn't want to upset her parents. And they were good parents in many ways, caring, present, responsible. So I learned to accept their boundaries. I learned to not ask. Looking back, I'm still surprised by how easy it is for a child to adopt an entire family's silence without understanding anything about it. It's like inheriting a closed door without knowing what's behind it. The only time my grandpa's presence felt real was during Christmas. Every December, without fail, an envelope arrived for me. No name on the back, no sender, just my name in elegant handwriting. To Natalie. Inside was always the same thing, a handwritten note, never more than 2 or 3 lines. Simple messages like, "I hope your year brings joy," or "You're stronger than you know," "Believe in yourself," "Thinking of you." And sometimes a small amount of money, nothing extravagant, $10, 20 maybe, just enough for a child to feel seen. I always assumed it was from an aunt or an older cousin. When I asked, my parents said the same phrase every year. "Oh, just someone who cares." I never knew how carefully chosen those words were. Not a friend, not a relative, not a family member, just someone. Someone who existed in our lives but wasn't allowed to truly be part of mine. There's another memory from my early teens that makes sense only now. It was summer. I was maybe 13. I came home from school one day and my mom was on the phone. She didn't see me walk in, so I stood quietly by the doorway, listening without meaning to. Her voice was tense, not angry, but tight, controlled. "Yes, I got your message." "No, she doesn't know anything because we agreed. Please don't send anything else. It just makes things harder." Harder? How could sending a kid a birthday card make things harder? I didn't know then. Now I do. Because those cards weren't just greetings, they were reminders. Reminders of promises my parents broke. Reminders of a relationship they didn't want me to have. Reminders of a truth they were trying to bury. A truth that would eventually find its way back to me in the form of one final letter. I saw my grandpa only a handful of times growing up. And every meeting was quiet, awkward, and far too short. Once at a grocery store, once at a gas station, once at a small cafe my friends and I stopped at after school. Each time, the encounter felt accidental. But now, looking back as an adult, I wonder how accidental they truly were, especially the cafe. I had gone there to get a sandwich with two friends. The place was half empty, with soft music playing and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. When I went up to pay, I noticed a man sitting by the window. Silver hair, sharp eyes, a familiar posture. He was watching the street, but when I looked closer, I realized he was watching me, or at least trying not to make it obvious. And when our eyes met, he smiled. Not a big smile, a gentle one. The kind of smile that feels like a memory you don't know you have. At the time, I thought he was just being friendly. He nodded politely, I nodded back, and that was it. But when I told my mom about the encounter later, she went still. "What did he say to you?" she asked. "Nothing. He just smiled." She didn't look relieved. She looked scared. But she hid it quickly. "That's good," she said. "Just be careful around strangers." I didn't know then that he wasn't a stranger. He was my grandfather. And that smile was him telling me, silently, carefully, that he hadn't forgotten me, that he had always been watching, even from a distance he never wanted. As I got older, the gaps in my family history became more noticeable. At school, whenever teachers talked about family trees, I felt embarrassed. Other kids had photos of grandparents, stories about reunions, traditions passed down from generation to generation. Me? I had two grandparents on my mom's side I barely saw, and a grandfather on my dad's side who felt like a ghost. I once asked my dad why we didn't visit him. He paused, long enough to answer my question without saying anything at all. "It's complicated, Natalie." That phrase again. "The relationship changed a long time ago," he added. "What happened?" I asked, softly. "It's not something you need to worry about." Which means there is a story, but you are not allowed to hear it. Not yet. Or maybe not ever. By the time I turned 16, the distance between my grandpa and me had become normal. So normal that I didn't question it. Life moved on. I grew up. I started college. I became an adult. And then the birthday cards stopped. Just like that. No warning, no explanation, just silence. At first, I assumed he had finally forgotten me, or moved on, or lost interest. It never crossed my mind that maybe something had happened, or that my parents had taken steps to make sure he couldn't reach me anymore. I didn't realize how wrong I was, how terribly wrong. Because the truth wasn't that he forgot me. The truth was that he wasn't allowed to reach me anymore. And the silence that followed wasn't his choice. It was the result of a decision made behind closed doors, one I would only discover years later after he passed away and I received his final letter. A letter addressed to me. A letter my parents never wanted me to read. A letter that explained the real reason they kept him away. A letter that revealed everything about the bike, the gifts, the cards, the silence, and the promise they broke. But that part of the story is still ahead. For now, all you need to know is this. Before I ever read my grandpa's final words, before I ever discovered what my parents were hiding, there was an entire history between them that I never knew existed. A quiet battle, a long-standing disagreement, a painful decision made years before I was old enough to speak. Something happened between them, something big enough to divide our family down the middle. And that crack, that fault line, would stay hidden until the day everything fell apart. Because the truth has a strange way of waiting. It waits patiently, silently, until one day it decides to break through the surface, no matter how deeply someone tried to bury it. I was 29 the day my grandfather's letter arrived. Old enough to think I understood my life, old enough to believe I knew the shape of my own family, but still young enough to be completely blindsided by a truth that had been waiting for me, patiently, quietly, all these years. It started like any other morning. Sunlight slipping through half-open blinds, coffee mug warming my hands, my cat curled lazily at the foot of my bed. A soft playlist humming in the background while I checked emails. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just another calm, ordinary day. The kind that feels so safe you never expect it to change anything. I remember stepping into the hallway of my apartment building with my keys dangling from my wrist, heading toward the shared mailbox slot downstairs. I wasn't expecting anything important. Maybe a bill, maybe an ad, maybe nothing at all. But when I opened the metal flap, a thick envelope with my full name stared back at me. Natalie Rose Armstrong. Written in handwriting I had seen only a handful of times in my life. Elegant, precise, confident, yet almost old-fashioned. I froze. My heart didn't pound, but it tightened, like it recognized something before my mind did. I touched the envelope with the tips of my fingers, almost afraid to hold it, as if some part of me already knew this wasn't just a letter. It was a beginning, or an ending, or both. I slowly pulled it out. It was heavier than a normal letter, almost like it carried weight beyond paper. When I flipped it over, I saw a small embossed crest on the back flap, a lowercase h inside a circle. I had seen that symbol once before, years ago, on a birthday card that arrived when I was around 13. A card my parents threw away before I could even open it. Suddenly, every sense sharpened. The lights in the hallway felt brighter. The air felt still. Even the distant sound of a neighbor's door closing echoed in my ears. I slid my finger under the seal. Before I could open it, I noticed a second detail. Small, almost invisible. The postmark date. 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. That alone wasn't strange. Mail sometimes got delayed. But written in tiny letters underneath the postmark was a line that made my breath catch. Prepared the week before my passing. My legs felt weak, and I lowered myself onto the wooden bench near the mailboxes. The week before his passing? How could I not know that? How could no one tell me? I sat there holding the letter like it was a fragile piece of glass. My grandfather, the man who bought me my first bike, the man whose smile I once saw across a cafe, the man who never stopped reaching out, was gone. And the only reason I knew now was because this letter told me. I didn't open it right away. I tried, but my hands were shaking too much. Something inside me whispered, "This will change everything." Not in a dramatic movie trailer way, in a quiet, personal way that feels like a door you can never close again once opened. So I clutched the envelope and went upstairs to my apartment, locking the door behind me as if the letter needed privacy too. I placed it gently on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Minutes, maybe an hour. Time became meaningless. I made tea, sat down, stood up, walked around the room and came back again. It felt ridiculous how heavy a single envelope could feel. But grief makes time unfamiliar. And secrets, even ones still sealed, make air feel heavier. Finally, I whispered to myself, okay, and tore the envelope open. Inside was a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, a second smaller envelope labeled for later, a photograph, and a document folded neatly, an official-looking one. My hands trembled when I unfolded the letter. I took a slow breath and began reading. The letter started in the simplest way, yet the moment I read the first line, I felt something crack open inside me. My dearest Natalie, if you are reading this, then my time here has come to an end. I swallowed hard. I continued. I wish I could have spoken to you sooner. I wish I could have been part of your life in the way I always wanted. But your parents made a choice many years ago, a choice I could not undo. My eyes stung, but I kept reading. I write this letter not to blame them, but to tell you the part of our story you were never given. Our story. Not their story, not his story. Ours. He continued, and every word felt like a thread pulling me closer to a truth I wasn't prepared for. The day you were born, I made a promise to you. A promise your parents accepted at the time, a promise they later broke. I stopped breathing for a moment. What promise? I turned to page 2 with my pulse thick in my ears. The red bike you loved so much, that was the first sign of my promise. A promise that I would always be there for you. A promise that you would never have to grow up without support. A chill ran through me. He knew about the bike. Of course he did. He had bought it. But the letter wasn't finished. Your parents returned or blocked every gift I tried to send you. They answered only half my calls. They kept me at a distance because they feared something you had every right to know. My heart thudded. Feared what? I turned the page slowly, like peeling back a piece of my own history. They feared you would learn the truth about your inheritance. Inheritance? I blinked, not fully understanding. He continued, not money alone, though there is that too. What they feared most was that you would learn what was meant for you and what they chose to keep from you. My skin prickled. There it was, the thing hiding behind years of silence. But the let wasn't done. Natalie, when you were 5, I set aside something for you. Something your parents agreed to at the time because they needed help. Help I gladly gave with love. But when they realized how it might affect their plans, they changed their minds. And when you grew old enough to start asking questions, they cut ties even further. I inhaled sharply. Plans? What plans? Every memory of "it's complicated" echoed in my ears all at once. Then came the line that changed everything in me. The truth is simple, my dear. I set up a trust for you, one meant to support you through school, life, and beyond. A trust? My blood ran cold. Your parents told me they would inform you when you turned 18. Instead, they chose not to. A heavy, trembling breath escaped me. My parents hid this all these years? And I had worked through college, struggled with jobs, juggled bills, never knowing something existed to help me? My eyes blurred, but I kept going. I do not write this to hurt you. I write it so you finally know your past was not what it seemed, so you understand that you were never forgotten. My throat tightened like a knot was forming inside it. And then, the trust still exists. Your name is still on it. The smaller envelope contains the details you need. I glanced at the smaller envelope, the one labeled "for later." My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a betrayal, a deep one. But the letter still had more to say. Page 3 was written in softer handwriting, like he had paused while writing. Natalie, when you were 5, I watched you grow from afar because it was the only way I could. I saw you riding your bike. I saw you grow into a brave young woman. I saw you work hard even when life was unfair. And I wished every day I could be closer. Tears fell onto the paper. Not loud, gasping tears, quiet ones. The kind that come from somewhere deep and raw. Then the final lines. You deserved the truth, and you deserve everything that was always meant for you. Whatever you choose to do with this information, I will be at peace knowing you finally know the real story. With all my love, your grandpa, Henry. I lowered the letter onto the table and pressed my palms against my eyes. I felt heartbreak and confusion and anger and loss and some emotion I didn't have a name for. My grandfather was gone. My parents had hidden something enormous, and I had lived my entire adult life without knowing what was waiting for me. I sat in silence until my tea went cold. After a long while, I finally picked up the smaller envelope. It was sealed neatly. My name was written on the front again, but this time the handwriting felt more heavy, more deliberate. I took a shaky breath and opened it. Inside was a single key and a folded sheet of paper. The paper said, Locker 312, Oakwell Bank. Everything begins there. Everything begins there. The words echoed in my mind. This wasn't just an inheritance. This wasn't just a trust. This was a path, a secret long buried, a story that stretched back farther than I ever imagined, a story my parents never wanted me to uncover, a story my grandfather waited until his last days to send me toward. I didn't know it yet, but that key was about to open a door into a world I had never known, a world of decisions, motives, promises, and betrayals deeper than I could have imagined. And the trust? That was only the beginning. I've always believed that the past only matters if you let it decide your future. But that week, I learned that the past had already been deciding mine long before I ever had a chance. The day after I read Grandpa's letter, I woke up with a strange heaviness in my chest. Not sadness, not fear, something else, something like unfinished business. For the first time in my life, I felt like the child version of me, the girl riding a purple bike with butterfly stickers, had been living inside a story I didn't fully understand. And now that she'd handed me the envelope, it was my turn to continue the journey. I didn't know where to start. I had only one letter, one message, one clue. But I knew this much. Someone had been hiding things from me. And I wasn't going to stop until I found out everything. My parents were at work, and the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every step echo louder than expected. I went up to the attic, somewhere I hadn't visited in years. The minute I opened the creaky wooden door, the smell of dust and old cardboard filled the air. Light filtered through the tiny round window, outlining piles of storage boxes that belonged to different chapters of our family history. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew what I hoped to find. Something that could prove Grandpa wasn't the villain I was raised to believe he was. After moving a few boxes aside, I found one labeled in faded ink. Henry Armstrong, MISC. My heart skipped. I pulled it down, coughing as dust rose into a cloud. When I opened it, I expected maybe a few papers or a random tool from his workshop, but instead I found dozens of folded shirts, small trinkets, and a stack of envelopes, most addressed to me, all unopened, all with my name written in the same smooth handwriting I had seen on the final letter. I froze. My hand shook as I touched the first envelope. Why were these here? Why would my parents keep these from me? Inside the first envelope was a birthday card from when I was 8. A handwritten message read, To my little Natalie, sorry I couldn't be there today. I hope your smile never fades. Love, Grandpa. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. He wasn't absent. He wasn't uninterested. He wasn't distant. He had been trying. They had kept him away. Each card told the same quiet story. Attempts, wishes, love, blocked by someone else. And as I reached the bottom of the box, I found something even harder to swallow. A printed email exchange between my dad and Grandpa. My breath caught as I read the subject line, about Natalie's visits. The conversation weren't like this. Henry, please stop sending these messages. We already talked about this. Natalie is doing fine and she doesn't need confusion in her life. Then Grandpa's reply, she deserves to know her family. I won't cause trouble, but I want time with my granddaughter. We agreed. My dad's final note, agreement or not, it's not happening. Don't contact us again. My vision blurred. I wasn't confused. They were scared. But scared of what? Or scared of who? There was one person outside my family who knew Grandpa well, our old neighbor, Mrs. Alden. She was in her late 70s with a sharp mind and an even sharper ability to notice everything. She had lived next door since I was born. If anyone knew the truth behind the Armstrong tensions, it was her. When she opened her door, she squinted at me, then smiled warmly. Natalie, I haven't seen you in ages. Come in, dear. Her house smelled like vanilla candles and herbal tea. She led me to the living room and we sat on floral pattern armchairs. I didn't know how to ease into the conversation, so I simply asked, Mrs. Alden, what was my grandpa like? She leaned back, eyebrows raised. Well, that depends on whether you want the version your parents always told everyone or the truth. My chest tightened. She knew. I want the truth, I said. She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected this day. Your grandpa was a thoughtful man. A strict man sometimes, yes, but deeply caring. He adored you since the day you were born. He wanted to be part of your life, Natalie. He tried very hard. I found letters, I said softly. I figured you would eventually. She gave me a sympathetic look. Your parents didn't want him around. They said it was for your own good, but I never believed that. Do you know why? She hesitated, then answered. Your grandpa had money, influence, expectations. And your parents, they made a few choices he didn't approve of. He offered help, support, but he asked for responsibilities in return. She paused meaningfully. Responsibilities involving you. My heart thudded. What kind of responsibilities? She lowered her voice. He wanted to help raise you, not take you away, just be present the way grandparents usually are. But your parents, well, they worried he'd judge their decisions, that he'd try to influence you. Influence me how? I asked. She leaned closer. He believed you deserved more. More opportunities, more stability, more guidance. She folded her hands. And he was willing to give you everything he had. Everything? The thought made my stomach churn. Mrs. Eldon, did he ever say anything about why he wasn't allowed to see me? Yes, she replied quietly. He said something once that I never forgot. She took a slow breath before repeating his words. Someday, Natalie will ask questions, and when she does, she'll learn who fought for her and who didn't. The room felt suddenly smaller, hotter. He knew this day would come, but hearing it made the truth feel heavier than I expected. After speaking with Mrs. Eldon, I needed more than memories. I needed facts. I went home and searched online for anything related to my grandpa's name. Old news articles, business reports, public records. What I found wasn't scandalous or dramatic. It was surprising. He had been respected, successful, known for charity work, financially stable enough to support our family many times over. If he wanted to be part of my life, why shut him out? The deeper I looked, the more patterns appeared. Throughout my childhood, there had been moments of unexpected generosity. The school trip I magically got a scholarship for, the medical bill that got sorted out before anyone explained how, the time our car broke down and the family friend paid for it. I had always assumed my parents were lucky or had saved wisely. Now, I wasn't so sure. My grandpa's presence was everywhere, invisible but undeniable. It felt like discovering footprints in the sand long after the tide erased them, faint but unmistakable. He had been helping, quietly, secretly, supporting not just me, but my parents. But if he helped them so much, why would they push him away? And why hide that help from me? That evening, I sat in the silent living room. The more I thought, the more the pieces refused to settle. I went to my parents' home office. It wasn't locked. It never had been. Their desk drawers were filled with the usual mess, pens, old receipts, manuals, cables. But the bottom drawer felt out of place, too orderly, too intentionally concealed. Inside was a slim black folder labeled Agreements. My stomach dropped. Inside were printed papers, contracts, financial documents, letters. The earliest one was dated around the time I was born. I read every line slowly. My grandpa had offered my parents financial support during a difficult time, support that covered their mortgage, a business loan, medical expenses, and future education planning for me. But at the bottom of one page was a single clause, a simple line, clear as day. In return, Henry Armstrong shall maintain a consistent relationship with his granddaughter, Natalie, including monthly visits and shared holidays. I couldn't breathe. It was legal, official, signed by both my parents. They had agreed, then reneged. Another letter followed. Henry, we can't fulfill the visitation schedule. Circumstances have changed. His reply, you gave me your word. I will not press this legally, but I will not be erased from her life. My dad's answer was short. Cold. Please stop contacting us. I closed my eyes. I wasn't being protected. I wasn't being shielded. I had been kept away from someone who loved me, someone who helped us when we needed it most. And the worst part? There was no mention of any wrongdoing by Grandpa. No danger, no threat, no reason to keep me away. Just control, pride, fear. At the very bottom of the folder, taped to the inside pocket, was a tiny voice recorder. I hesitated before pressing play. My dad's voice came through first, angry, controlled, frustrated. Then Grandpa's voice, steady, calm. They were arguing. Dad, you can't dictate how we raise our daughter. Grandpa, I'm not dictating anything. I'm asking to be part of her life. You agreed. Dad, we don't need your involvement. Grandpa, you gave me everything else I gave you.
Silence. Heavy silence. Then Grandpa spoke again, softer this time. One day, she'll know what happened, and I hope you're prepared to explain why you kept me away. I paused the recording. My hands trembled. That was the moment everything clicked. My parents didn't want him influencing me because they owed him, and guilt makes people hide the truth. I sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, letters, cards, and truths I wasn't ready for but desperately needed. I realized something painful. I had mourned a relationship I never had, but it wasn't because Grandpa didn't want it. It was because someone else decided for me. And now he was gone. I couldn't ask him questions. I couldn't hear his side. I couldn't hug him or thank him or tell him I grew up okay. All I had were his letters and the realization that his presence had always been there, hidden behind my parents' choices. But there was something else too, a quiet, rising determination. If they wanted to hide the truth, I would uncover every piece of it. If they didn't want him in my life, I would honor him in ways they never allowed. And if they thought I would stay silent, they didn't know me at all. Because now, I wasn't just Natalie Armstrong. I was the granddaughter of the man they tried to erase. And I was ready to learn everything, no matter what it cost. I used to believe that families fall apart because of dramatic moments. Shouts in living rooms, slammed doors, big confrontations. But the truth I discovered next wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was quiet, calculated, almost businesslike. The kind of truth that doesn't explode, it seeps. And by the time you finally notice it, the damage has been happening for years. The morning after I found the folder, the letters, and the recording, I woke up earlier than usual. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even confused anymore. I was determined. The kind of determination that makes your spine feel straighter, your eyes feel clearer, and your heart feel heavier, but in a way that gives you strength, not weakness. My grandfather, a man I barely knew, had fought to be in my life. My parents, people I trusted most, had fought equally hard to keep him out. And now I needed to know why. Not the surface level reasons, not the excuses, not the "it was complicated" responses they'd use to delay the truth. I needed the real story, the one they buried. It started with a name I found at the bottom of one of the papers: Thomas Alder, attorney. There was a number. I didn't expect him to answer, but when he did, his voice was surprisingly warm. Thomas Alder speaking. Hi, my name is Natalie Armstrong. There was a pause, a long one, then a soft exhale. Henry's granddaughter? My throat tightened. Yes. His tone changed instantly. Gentler, respectful, almost relieved. I've been expecting your call for a long time. My heart skipped. You knew about me? I knew your grandfather wanted you to know certain things. He prepared for the possibility that he might not get to tell you himself. My fingers gripped the edge of the countertop. Can we meet? I asked. Of course. Today works. There's something I need to show you. Something? My grandfather couldn't tell me directly, so he left people. Clues. Trails. A whole world of secrets I never knew belonged to me. Thomas's office was in an older building with tall windows and shelves full of thick binders. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and calm eyes, the kind of person who looks like he's watched life unfold from the front row. He motioned me inside. He said, as we sat down, I want you to understand. Your grandfather was not a man who accepted things easily, especially when it came to you. I swallowed. Then why didn't he fight harder? Why didn't he go to court, try to get visitation rights, something? He folded his hands. He could have. He knew he could, but he didn't want you to become a trophy in a legal battle. He believed you deserved peace, even if it meant he stayed in the shadows. My chest tightened painfully. He fought, Thomas continued, but quietly, strategically, behind the scenes. For what? I whispered. He leaned back, studying me for a moment. For your future, for your safety, and for your inheritance. My heart nearly stopped. Inheritance? He nodded. Yes. Your grandfather had assets, significant ones, but he never trusted your parents enough to involve them. I stiffened. What do you mean? He opened a file. My name was typed on the top. This was created when you were 3. A trust, investments, a portfolio. All protected, all kept separate. Separate? Separate from what? Or from who? Your grandfather believed in planning ahead, especially when he saw the financial decisions your parents were making. I blinked. What kind of decisions? He sighed. The kind that put them at risk. The kind that required your grandfather to step in more than once. Not because he wanted control, but because he didn't want their mistakes shaping your life. Suddenly, things began to click. The sudden paid bills, the mystery scholarships, the financial miracles from my childhood, all of it traced back to Grandpa. And my parents didn't want that known. But it wasn't just money. He slid another paper toward me, a legal addendum. It read, in the event of financial collapse, custody of the minor, Natalie Armstrong, shall temporarily transfer to Henry Armstrong until stable conditions are restored. I stared at it, stunned. He wanted custody of me? Only if things became unsafe. Only if necessary. He wasn't trying to replace your parents. He wanted a safety net for you. But why would he think I'd ever need that? He hesitated. Because he had already bailed them out once. I felt the air leave my lungs. What happened? He took a breath, then told me the truth. When you were 8, there was an incident, a financial misstep, a loan your father took that went wrong. Your family nearly lost your home. My eyes widened. My parents never told me that. They wouldn't, he said gently. Your grandfather stepped in, he paid the debt, cleared the consequences, but he only agreed on one condition. I already knew the answer. I felt it in my bones. He wanted to be in my life, I said quietly. Yes. Regular visits, a relationship, a bond. And my parents agreed. They did. And then they broke that agreement. Yes. I stared down at my hands. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to scream. But mostly, I wanted the truth. All this time, they said he was difficult, demanding, controlling. He was firm, not controlling. He was a man who believed in responsibility, in structure, in effort, and he wanted to help you grow into someone confident and capable. The words felt heavy. He saw potential in you, even as a child. He used to say, Natalie has a spark. It's our job to make sure life doesn't dim it. A lump formed in my throat. He cared, I whispered. He loved you, he said, deeply, and that's why he created a trust no one else could touch. Not your parents, not the family. Only you. Only me. Protected from everyone, even the people
raising me. Thomas reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. This, he said, is something he wanted you to have when you were older, much older. But given everything, now is the right time. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were a small silver locket, a folded newspaper clipping, another letter addressed to me, and a photograph. The photograph made my heart stop. It was me, maybe 4 years old, sitting on my grandpa's lap while he read me a book. I didn't remember the picture or the moment. But in the photo, I looked comfortable, happy, safe. And he looked content in a way I had never seen in real life. This was taken during a time your mother allowed exactly 2 visits, Thomas explained. She called it a trial run. After that, things changed. Why? I asked. Because he asked to see you again, and he reminded them of the agreement. He paused, and they didn't like that. I closed my eyes. My childhood wasn't broken, but it could have been fuller, richer, more complete, and they stole that from me. When I unfolded the letter inside the wooden box, I felt my chest tighten. His handwriting, neat, calm, familiar. My dear Natalie, if you are reading this, it means time has moved the way it always does, too quickly. I hope you grew into someone strong, curious, and kind. I hope you lived freely, and I hope the world has been good to you. There are things I wanted to tell you myself, but life has a way of choosing its own path. I never wanted to bring conflict into your home. I wanted peace for you above all else. But I also wanted you to know the truth. You were never forgotten. You were never unwanted, and you were always loved, more deeply than you know. My vision blurred. Everything I built, everything I saved, everything I planned was for you, not because I expected anything in return, but because I believed in your future. Tears streamed down my face. If you ever wonder why I fought quietly, it was because I didn't want you growing up in battles meant for adults. You deserved safety, not tension. I pressed the letter to my chest. I hope that one day you will understand my choices, and I hope you choose your path with clarity, not obligation. With love always, Grandpa. I let out a shaky breath. He knew. He knew he was being pushed away. He knew he might not live long enough to explain. So he prepared. He left pieces for me to find, pieces that painted a different picture of him, one my parents never wanted me to see. When I got home, I sat on my bed with the wooden box, the legal papers, the letters, the trust documents, and the photograph spread around me like a mosaic of a life I should have known sooner. I realized something that hurt more deeply than anything else. My grandfather didn't just fight for me. He protected me from the people who claimed to be protecting me. And my parents didn't hide him because he was dangerous. They hid him because he saw their flaws, because he held them accountable, because he expected responsibility from them, and they couldn't handle that. So they made a choice. Cut him out. And cut me off from him too. But the part that stung the most, they didn't do it out of love. They did it out of pride. As the day faded to evening light, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not grief, resolve, understanding. He fought for me because he saw something in me they didn't. He believed I deserved chances, guidance, opportunity, stability. He believed I could grow into someone strong, someone capable of handling truths, responsibility, and independence. He believed in me more than anyone else had ever. And my parents, they feared losing control more than they valued my connection to him.
That was the real betrayal. Not the hidden letters, not the secrecy, not the missed holidays. The betrayal was that they didn't believe in me the way he did. He fought for me because he saw my future clearly. They fought against him because they only saw their own fears. By the time I closed the wooden box, I felt completely different inside. Empowered, awake, focused. This wasn't the end of the truth. It was the beginning. And the more I learned, the more one thought crystallized. My revenge wasn't going to be dramatic. It wasn't going to be destructive. It was going to be intentional. My parents had controlled the past, but the future was mine, and they couldn't stop what was coming. Not anymore. I used to think revenge was loud, angry, confrontational, full of shouting, tears, and slam doors. But the truth is, real revenge is quiet, calculated. It's not about hurting someone, it's about reclaiming your power. And finally, at 29, I understood exactly what that meant. Everything I had learned from Grandpa's letters, from Thomas, from Mrs. Alden, everything pointed to one fact. My parents had kept me from the person who truly loved me. They had made choices rooted in pride, in control, in fear. And now I had the choice. The first thing I did was nothing dramatic. No confrontations, no calls to my parents, no social media posts. I sat at my desk with all of Grandpa's papers laid out in front of me. The trust documents, the letters, the photograph, the wooden box. Everything he had left behind was mine. Completely mine. I didn't need them to acknowledge me. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need validation. I needed freedom. And that freedom started with understanding exactly what I had and what they had tried to hide from me. The trust was real. The money was real. The opportunity to live a life unshackled by their fear was real. It was all there, waiting for me. Not as revenge on them, but as justice for me. I spent weeks going through every detail: financial accounts, investments, legal papers, letters hidden away for decades. I made a plan, not to humiliate, not to punish, but to assert my independence. Step 1, secure my own life. Step 2, honor Grandpa's memory by using the tools he had provided. Step 3, show my parents that the past couldn't control me anymore. I didn't confront them directly. I didn't yell. I let my actions speak louder than any words could. I paid off lingering debts they had hidden from me. I invested in things Grandpa would have approved of. I donated to charities he had cared about. I even made sure the scholarships he had intended for me were set up for the next generation. Every move I made was deliberate, every choice a reflection of the lessons he had quietly taught me. One evening, my parents called, not because they cared about reconciliation, not because they had realized their mistakes. They called because they had heard whispers. They had seen a life flourishing without their interference. I answered the phone, calm, polite, confident. "Hi," my mother said cautiously. "Hi," I replied. There was a pause. Then my father, "Natalie, we need to talk." I smiled softly. "Of course. What's this about?" There was no shame in my voice, no anger, only a quiet power that only comes from knowing the full truth and the ability to move forward. They hesitated, and in that pause, I realized my revenge had already begun. I didn't lecture them. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't recount every hidden gift or blocked letter. Instead, I let them see me thriving. I shared my achievements, my life, my independence. Everything they had tried to control, I had mastered on my own terms. And I left them with one simple truth. I had found Grandpa's love, and through it,
I had found myself. Their silence was deafening, but I didn't need it, because the quiet, controlled strength I wielded was louder than anything they could have ever said. Some might call it revenge, some might call it justice. I call it choice. I didn't humiliate them, I didn't destroy their lives, I didn't seek pity or sympathy. I simply reclaimed what was mine. I honored the grandfather who never gave up on me. I used the gifts he left behind to live fully, courageously, and independently. And yes, it felt like revenge, but not the messy, vindictive the kind that's calm, measured, powerful. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes the best revenge is living your life the way you are always meant to. Months later, I returned to Grandpa's letters. I read them again, slowly. I could almost hear his voice, almost feel his hands holding mine, almost see him smiling, quietly proud. And there it was, the last thing he had left me, a sense of purpose, a sense of self, a sense of belonging. I realized then that the real lesson he had left me wasn't money. It wasn't legal documents. It wasn't even hidden gifts. It was this: live bravely, live fully, and never let anyone make you doubt your worth. I smiled through my tears, and for the first time in a long time, I felt complete. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't destructive. It wasn't about them. It was about me. It was about finally claiming the life that had always been waiting for me, hidden in plain sight, guided by the love of a grandfather who never gave up on me. And as I stepped out into the world that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Freedom from the past. Freedom from betrayal. Freedom to be Natalie Armstrong, completely, unapologetically, and on her own terms. The road ahead wasn't easy. It never is. But with every choice I made from that day forward, I knew I carried Grandpa's strength, his love, and his unwavering faith in me. And that was more powerful than any revenge could ever be.